So I wanted to get some information out before it occurs about the upcoming solar eclipse that's going to happen on the 21st. Specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about some misconceptions that people have about eclipses and also some suggestions about how we can go about working with them in a way that is conducive to our lives moving a bit smoother and in a good direction. And so equally, I wanted to spend some time talking a little bit about some of the conceptual framework we need to understand this. And this is meant to be a short video, so I'm not going to be able to go into great detail in any one particular part, but I just thought it'd be good to give folks an overview and also recommend some other people's work that I think really exemplifies how we can work with eclipse times in a way that is really conducive to, as I said, to moving forward in a positive and good direction. So as we know, we're sort of in the maybe in a low, well, in a moment of great change, and that also a lot of the change that's come to most parts of the world up until this time has been one very destabilizing, but many ways some of us have gotten used to and are now looking forward to what's next in all of these big changes that have come through. And, I think that it's important to understand that this moment that we're in, especially at the very, very end of June and into July, is its own form of intense moment in the larger story of this year as it unfolds. But it sort of sits between an earlier part of the year, which was marked by a lot of increasing turmoil, change, and radical transformation that was really going on all around us. And similar some events that will occur in the fall that also relate to those types of things, particularly as Mars moves into Aries and begins to square and continuously squares Saturn, having returned to Capricorn, very close to Pluto once again during Mars's retrograde period. So I think it's important that we understand this moment that we're about to go into, because I think that it also is a pivotal moment in the 2020 story, with that other piece being, an aspect of maybe a later and important final chapter. So for one, to start with, what I'd like to emphasize is that eclipses, literally because they are a blocking of the light, and the luminaries, the sun and the moon, are very much linked with the development and continuation flourishing of the forces of life as we understand them. And it's not that there aren't other planets that we might include in this, such as Venus and Jupiter in that. But in particular, the luminaries have a lot to say about the life force. And what is happening when there is an eclipse is that this life force is being blocked. It's being blotted out in the sky. And I think for us to get a sort of more deeper sense of what eclipses might entail, or how they initially might speak to us, is to consider an earlier human being's experience of an eclipse, where one moment there is bright daylight, and then next thing you notice there's the sun or the moon is being swallowed, or that the light of it is being changed drastically, such as lunar eclipses, wherein the moon's light changes to a reddish hue and it becomes very dramatic in that way. So I think when we go back to that, we can sort of think how terrifying this would be to watch your main source of light, become obscured in this moment by shadow. And I think that in order to also get a good sense of what eclipses entail and symbolize, that the Vedic astrological tradition um, has really developed those ideas, and in my opinion, in the way that I think is probably representing the most advanced way of thinking about it, which is the idea of the North Node and the South Node being these shadow planets, if you will. Um, and I'd like to spend a moment talking about that. Before I do, we can just consider that, that the axis between the sun's orbit and the moon's orbit is very slightly off. It's about off by like 5 degrees. And because of that variation, it means that this place where the orbit of the sun and the moon intersect is where we will expect to have solar and lunar eclipses. So that being said, a little bit about the North Node and the South Node, Rahu and Ketu, as they're known in the Vedic astrological tradition. In the story that is most linked with them, we have this idea where the gods realized that they could create this nectar by churning the Milky Way. And however, they needed the help of the Asuras, or the demons, to be able to churn this Milky Way to result in this divine nectar. So it was sort of a collaborative effort between the gods and the demons, and they used a fulcrum of a great mountain and the sort of staff of a giant snake to be able to cause this churning motion to occur. And as this churning motion occurred, this nectar started to arise. And as it came time to go about, when it came time to actually taste this nectar, which bestowed immortality, Vishnu was giving a drop of this nectar of immortality to each of the devas, the gods. And there was one demon in particular that was able to mask itself as one of the gods. And as Vishnu is handing this droplet of this nectar to this demon, the sun and the moon were nearby him, I think on either side, as I remember, and said that it revealed the true identity, that it as a demon. And when they did this, when Vishnu realized this, the drop had just barely touched the demon's tongue. And at that very moment, as that drop of nectar is touching the demon's tongue, Vishnu severed the head of this demon. But what it did mean is that it gained immortality. However, its head was severed from its body. So the head is represented by Rahu, and the body is represented by Ketu. And they forever stalk the sun and the moon for an opportunity to try to devour them. But it also explains why when they do devour them, they never are able to keep it in that state, because it's a headless form, so it always falls out, if you will, and comes out the other side. But temporarily, this being that now is split into two is able to momentarily obscure the sun and the moon. So keeping that in mind, we can think a little bit about that origin story and how really what's happening is that this is not a benefic factor that is suddenly challenging or trying to devour the sun in this case. So we can think about how this force is in many ways will speak to what it represents, which is that the the head of the dragon, as it's sometimes called as well, in some Western astrological traditions, Rahu, the North Node, is where this eclipse is going to take place very soon here on the 21st. And it is an annular solar eclipse. So by that, it doesn't cover the disk of the sun perfectly, but what it does is it covers it very well to the point that you end up with this ring of fire that's kind of will be visible in the sky. When to think about Rahu specifically, we can consider this insatiable appetite, that Rahu has, that it's never quite satisfied, that it represents this insatiability and this sort of endless desire that is present there. And when we're trying to understand the effects that North Node eclipses have, we can understand that it magnifies the intensity of this insatiability. And it's very important for us to keep this in mind as we go forward with what I'm talking about. So the other thing to think about it, though, is that the North Node is almost representing this cosmic influx, whereas Rahu is sort of the outdrain of our local space-time. Ketu is the outdrain of our local space-time. That Rahu is representing like an influx type of energy. And it's not that there's nothing that can be done positively with this, but another way to think about it is from the perspective of of constitutional logic in something like Ayurveda, whereas in Rahu represents an extreme of dryness and air that's represented by an extreme of Vata. So when these states are there, there's sort of a mania that is present, or an anxiety almost that's present of losing conditions. And the idea of losing things becomes very difficult. So there's a clinging to and a sort of moving towards objects of desire, and as I said, in this insatiable way. And so with this, what we can think about is this moment that's happening now. We have this solar eclipse occurring in Cancer, tropically, and at the same time, just a day ago, I think less than a day ago, Mercury was stationing and has now turned retrograde in Cancer as well. And what we can think about with this is the way in which our latent emotions that have not been processed. I would wonder how a lot of this has been related to how much we've all been forced to be so contained for so long and so restricted in the way that we have, and the lack of connectivity that I think a lot of us have been able to have authentically with our emotions since we're in the domain of the moon in Cancer. That this insatiability, this vitiation of Vata, this intense drying and this drying of this part of the sky could represent for us all a way in which we are sort of trying to compensate for this long period of lack of really heartfelt emotional connection being possible, that we might be drawn to make that manifest in things that are not within our best interest. At the same time, Rahu does point to things that are coming in. So I do think it does speak to an absence that we have. And so in that way that we need to, and it's something I've been saying and thinking for a while, especially as I worked through events around the Venus retrograde in Gemini, which is still not completely over. Very soon, Venus will station direct in about a week's time on the 25th. But what we can consider is how our emotional self is experiencing a large level of maybe maybe it's feeling not like it cannot fully be manifest, and because of that lack, there is a pulling towards things that are almost like providing an artificial sense of fulfillment that's there. So it's just a possible manifestation. Something to think about is that when it comes to the personal effects of eclipses, we always should look to the domain of our own chart, and that the house that the eclipse is falling in, and that's going to tell us where the impact will be. And particularly those who are having this on the angles in the first, seventh, fourth, or 10th house, obviously will have a more widespread effect within your whole chart. So if Cancer falls on any of those axes, then that would indicate probably a stronger effect for you personally, which is again also a reason to remediate it, which I will end on talking a little bit about eclipse remediation. The other thing to think about is what we might think of as the mundane astrological effects, and this is around things that relate to effects that are influencing larger groups of people and or countries. We could think of it this way, and or specific kinds of people within the world. And here we can think of a couple things. One is that because this eclipse is happening in Cancer, as Mercury, who rules commerce, is going retrograde in Cancer, and that Mercury recently experienced a high point in his solar phase cycle that I think was tied in many ways with a lot of initiatives to try to get business back up and running throughout the world. We may see some impacts around business and finance playing out as this retrograde, this Mercury retrograde, and this eclipse in Cancer around this exact same time is taking place. The other thing I want to talk about is the as I said, the more widespread mundane effects. And if we look to it to understand some of the features of the eclipse itself, that if we look to see where in the world the eclipse is visible, that generally helps us to understand where we would see a manifestation of these larger scale effects. And with this eclipse, the main path of it is going from Central Africa through the southern Middle East, across Pakistan and northern India, across central China, and going down across a little bit near Japan. Actually, it's crossing over as it moves into the Pacific Ocean, and that's the most focused area. The most darkness will occur in that region, and then fanning out from either side of that, we can see a blocking of the light that goes as far as southern Europe, as well as southern Russia, and as far south as northern Africa, and across the rest of the lower half of Asia. So when we look to it, this is the place we would see to have the most effects in terms of worldly effects. And something I have been considering is trying to pay close attention to how this eclipse impacts that part of the world. And I think that due to the current conditions that we're experiencing in the world, that some of the world's poorest people are in these regions of the world. And I think that things around nourishment, because again, we are with the moon is an important thing to think about, and how we can support events as they unfold there if we're in a situation to be able to support those. If events do start to unfold in a bad way there, I think we should consider how we can support those. Um, and maybe that's something, that I'll make a video about later. So we have the option when an eclipse does occur to do something called remediation, which is that we can't completely undo the impact that it has, but we can do our best to remediate its impact. And I think that there are many people that have written about rituals that you can do that are quite accessible to be able to remediate the effects of eclipses. So what I'm going to do is refer to one of them in particular, which is from Caitlin Kopic of Sphere and Sundry, and she has done a remarkable job about really laying out a very effective and Vedic-based approach of what you can do. I think one of the things that she mentions that that maybe is outside of that I think is really important to do just relies on the principles of really good magic, which is that salt water is very absorptive of negative energy and negative currents that are running through us. So I would really plan to take a good salt bath on the day of the eclipse. And if you can combine that with prayers that are effective in remediating and relying on God forms that are particularly good at remediating the negative effects of the eclipse, I would encourage you to be able to do that. But just to know, the eclipse is not a good time for doing your normal sort of new moon type magic. It's really not. And however, there might be some very malefic and maybe even currents within some left-hand path or witchcraft traditions, we might think of it that way, that could make very good use of eclipses. But in terms of what we probably are each wanting in our own life, is a direction that moves us towards good fortune. So remediation is a really powerful way. I've been remediating eclipses, I think, for about 3 or 4 years now, using different methods, but I think, again, the ones that she presents there are so clear and straightforward that I'll recommend them, and I'll make sure that they're included in a link underneath this video. But that's all for now. I hope your the weekend goes well for you, and we'll see how it unfolds. One last thing I would mention before we go is the effects that can sometimes take place. One level of effect that happens is the moon's presence within the same sign in which the eclipses occurred, and that will basically, the moon will leave Cancer, I believe, on the 23rd, Tuesday the 23rd, depending on where you are. And so we should see like a shift of some kind there. However, because depending on which mundane techniques that you use, sometimes we do look at that eclipse being in effect for the amount, a year per the amount of hours that the eclipse occurs. And this one does last for about 2.5 hours. So because of that, we could be looking at effects that unfold for quite a long time into the future. But also they're often linked to being in effect until the next eclipses occur, which is generally 6 months from the eclipses that were most recent. So if we look forward, there are some very, I don't even know if we could call it, some very minor a very minor lunar eclipse that occurs later in the year. It's not quite as minor as the one well, it's a minor one, let's put it that way, that occurs on the 29th of November, and then a total solar eclipse that occurs on the 14th of December. So we could be looking at this eclipse being in effect at least until then. So yeah, it just depends on what technique we use. So I leave you with that. I wish you all the best. I hope that if you do remediate, I hope that it is very effective, and I wish you all the best. Until next time, talk soon.